Welcome to Bible for Overcomers. The Garden of Eden, where was it? I know many people now say that the latest findings show that the most ancient human bones come out of Africa. Well, I'm not really too worried about where the Garden of Eden was, but since this is a definite topic of discussion, I want to just look at what the evidence says. In Genesis chapter 2, it talks about, and the river went out of Eden to water the garden, and from thence it was parted and became into four heads. The name of the first is Pison. Now, Pison is the hardest of the four rivers to identify. It has been called the Nile River, but Josephus, back in the first century, identified it with the Ganges River, which flows southeast through India. And other scholars, Josephus was a historian, but some Bible scholars have called it the Indus River, which also flows southeast through India. The name of the second one is Gihon, the same as it that encompasses the whole land of Ethiopia, being on the east coast of Africa. And the name of the third river is Hiddekel, which Daniel 10:4 specifically says the Hiddekel River is the Tigris River. So we're back up into Mesopotamia, back up in present-day Iraq, in Iran. And the fourth river is Euphrates. Now that's the only one of the four rivers that has maintained its same name. Then if we look at where all of the traveling goes after in the pre-flood civilization, it all seems to be centered east of Mesopotamia and toward the east. And thus, even after the flood, we have the Nimrod's kingdom. All of this is identified as the plain of Shinar. This is basically where Iraq is now, and moving up towards Iran. So when we look at all of the movement of the first people, both pre-flood and post-flood, it seems to be moving towards the east from the Mesopotamia region. Furthermore, in Genesis chapter 8, Mount Ararat is identified as the location where Noah's Ark comes to rest. Now, Mount Ararat is in present-day Turkey. This is substantially to the north and is about 20 miles as a crow flies from the Armenian border. I personally would have to say that I think the origin of man, in the biblical view, if you are a Bible believer, is somewhere in present-day Armenia and eastern Turkey, working down towards Mesopotamia. I think that is where man came from. I see all the movement going to the east from wherever the Garden of Eden was, and all evidence points to that. Now, in the beginning, there was something called Pangea, which is one earth mass, at least this is what most people believe. And in Genesis chapter 10, again, we're after the flood now, Genesis chapter 10, in the genealogies, in verse 25, it says, "And unto Eber was born two sons. The name of one was Peleg, for in his days was the earth divided, and his brother's name was Joktan." So we have the earth being divided, which seems to kind of accentuate this, God dividing man. I know the one overriding thing that Nimrod and all leftists are united on is pushing everybody together to the point where you erase all distinctions, and even the ultimate is to erase sexual gender, sexual identity. That is the one dream that all the leftists agree, is that every distinction, every border, everything should be erased and people should be pushed together so we can have the ultimate, right? The 15-minute cities where everybody is in under control. Whether your exit is assured from these cities is another topic for debate. But that's the one thing, if you just step back and you look and you just feel the spirit of the age, the zeitgeist, right? This is one thing that the left always agrees on. And this is one thing that Lucifer is very interested in, pushing people together. That was the whole principle of Nimrod's kingdom, symbolized by the tower later, but it wasn't the tower so much, it was his kingdom. And God showed his absolute will in this in dividing it. It was called Babel because people began to babble at each other because God divided the languages. And second, and also the preceding chapter in Genesis 8 or Genesis 10, we have Pangea being divided. We have the landmass being divided. So these two things, the language and the division, shows us that God has no problem with people developing in distinct tribes and nation groups, and we're all part of God's creation. There's nothing wrong with that. That's the way God, by those two acts, has shown that he wants people to find Him within their own culture, within their people group. There's nothing wrong with that. Nor is there anything wrong with people voluntarily coming together. But when they're coerced and they're pushed together, and you can recognize the forces and what those forces stand for that push people together, you can kind of get an idea of what I'm talking about. But personally, I think that the Garden of Eden, based on the evidence that I've seen, based on the movement of the people groups, both pre and post-flood, based on where Noah's Ark comes to rest, and I understand that is many years after the Garden of Eden, but I would say that all the activity shows that it is somewhere between present-day Iraq, basically Mesopotamia, which I realize is west of Iraq, but that general Mideast area working up towards present-day Armenia and eastern Turkey. By the way, the oldest civilization that I'm aware of where they had apartments, houses, like the oldest one that they've been able to find is in eastern Turkey. I think it's called Ceryuk, Seruk. But anyway, that's one of the oldest ones. I believe that goes back somewhere 6,000 to 9,000 years ago. But anyway, I just thought this is interesting. The location of the Garden of Eden, that's my opinion on it. I could be wrong, but I think that's where the Bible shows most of the activity, both pre and post-flood. Thank you, and share it if you think it's interesting. I love these kind of discussions.